Chapter 16, 69 Days After. The decision to tell Beckett about seeing Jay kissing another boy wasn't really a decision at all. There are no two ways about it. I knew he would want to know. No one likes to get duped. On Sunday, Maddie requested an all-day practice since the party at Isaac's was only 5 days away. So I bailed on the squat and gobble ritual and told Beck I'd meet him at Ocean Beach afterward. "I'm sorry I've been so busy," I said when I called, "but there's no way I can blow this off." He sighed, and I imagined him on the roof deck on his cell phone. "There is no pleasure in having nothing to do," he said. "The fun is having lots to do and not doing it." But I told him Maddie would kill me if I showed up late again. Wednesday was bad enough. By the time Isaac hailed a cab and I got to practice, it was past 10 o'clock, and she and Rabbit had called it a night. "What time does she want you there? I'll eat fast," he said, "like a vacuum. You won't even notice I've eaten at all. Just give me an hour, 1 cup of coffee." "No can do. But after practice, I promise. I'll meet you at Ocean Beach around 5. "It was Andrew Jackson, by the way," he told me. "You didn't even ask." But I was already saying, "I have to go," and dropping the phone on the cradle. We played for over 2 hours before we took our first break, but I was thinking too hard and couldn't get in the zone. The more I tried not to think about Isaac or Jay or my dad, the more I focused on the music. And the more I focused on the music and what I should have been doing with my hands and my feet, the worse it got. "You're 4 beats too fast," Maddie said when she stopped singing mid-song and turned to face me. "What's going on back there?" she asked, but I just shrugged. "Let's take 10 to regroup," she said. I didn't feel like telling them about the scare I'd had that morning and explaining why I couldn't get my head on track, so I just nodded. I'd been calling the local hospitals every few days to check and to make sure no one with my father's name had been admitted. And that morning, for the first time, they asked me to repeat myself, twice. "Hold, please," the woman said eventually. I'd clutched the phone and counted backward from 12 at least 7 times as I sat on my bed. It wasn't even one of those hold systems that played classical music to calm you down, just a white noise. "Pace," the woman said when she came back to the line, "and you're his daughter?" "For 17 years, the apple never falls far from the tree. Birds of a feather flock together." "He came in last night," she said. Behind her, I heard a telephone ringing and voices talking. My heart was in my throat then, a gigantic thumping thing, shutting down my airway. "Adam Pace, right? Looks like he arrived around midnight." I made her repeat it 3 times. "Adam," she said, "not Aaron." It wasn't my father after all, but it had taken me almost an hour to stop shaking. Ocean Beach runs about 4 miles along the west coast of the city, but our favorite section was at the bottom of Golden Gate Park, south of the Cliff House, near the beach chalet. In the summer, it's cold near the water, which mostly keeps tourists away, and Beckett and I liked to hang out there and watch the waves as often as we could. It wasn't the cleanest spot because lots of people brought their dogs there to run and didn't bother picking up after them, so you had to be careful where you stepped. The homeless liked to hang out there, and you had to dodge trash and bonfire debris when you walked in the sand. But it was our spot. It just was. We'd been meeting there ever since we were old enough to catch the bus by ourselves, and it had always been one of the best places to clear my head. I found him sitting on a log, brown blanket spread out at his feet, and he said, "You, my rock star friend, are 20 minutes late." "It didn't go well," I said as I sat down, stripped off my Chuck tees and socks, and dug my toes into the sand. "Practice, I mean." In front of us, a couple threw a frisbee for their golden retriever. His fur knotted and wet. The woman was wrapped in an oversized sweater and wore brown and white pinstripe leggings, and the man sported a small navy coat with brass buttons running up the front. We watched for a while as they took turns with the disc and chased the dog down toward the waves. But really, all I could see was Jay kissing that boy in front of the bakery. "Did you get brunch?" I asked Beck, and he said, "Nah, I just hung around the house with my mom most of the day and talked on the phone with Jay." He was stuck at work, but it was pretty slow enough for him to call and ask me to keep him company. We talked so long, I swear, I thought my cell phone might melt in my hand. That was my opening, right there. So about Jay, there's something I need to tell you, or Oh, that's nice, he called. I guess he finally got that other kid's tongue out of his mouth long enough to remember he was dating you. Or maybe I'd start with, "You're not going to like this, Beckett, and I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I promise it's going to be okay." Because it would be. He had been through worse by then, like the time Lori found that lump and we had to wait 3 days for the results, even though it ended up just being some weird cyst thing that wasn't anything at all. Or when his cat died when we were in ninth grade, the one they'd had since before he was born, the one that used to sleep at the bottom of his bed and warm his feet. He always said Turquoise was my stiffest competition for first chair as his best friend. Those were real life things, but he and Jay had only known each other a few weeks. That's what I kept telling myself, rose-colored glasses phase stuff. And even though the news would be a buzzkill at first, in the long run, I knew he'd be glad that I told him. Opening number 2. I know Isaac Thompson's party will be mostly kids from our school, he said, and I know Jay's older and everything, but I asked him to come. He said he'd have to meet me there, though, so I was thinking I could go with you. I could be your first roadie. That'd be good, right? He dropped off the log and was sitting with me on the edge of the blanket by then, and he raked his fingers through the sand while we talked. I should have said, "No, you need to drop that kid like a bad habit. He's not what he seems. He doesn't deserve you." But instead, I told him sure, he could ride over with us. Rabbit was going to drive all the equipment over around 5, then come back and pick up Maddie and me. Opening number 3. Cool, because I really want to get to know him better, he told me. Cool, because I really want you to get to know him better, he told me. I know him better than you think. I know it hasn't been that long, and I know this totally gooey and lame, but I feel like he gets me, he said. Gets you in trouble, gets you and another boy too. It's really important to me for you and him to be friends. I've got a good feeling about this one, Cal. Behind him, a few hundred yards down the beach, a man walked by the edge of the water. He was barefoot and wore baggy cargo pants and a white long sleeve, his tangled hair blowing and overgrown just like my dad's might have been if he hadn't gotten a trim since the last time we've seen him. Opening number 4. I want to hear all about your trip to Alcatraz, Beck said. I was thinking it might be something fun that Jay and I could do sometime. He was in that annoying phase where his brain relentlessly drew a line between any tiny thought and straight to Jay, the boy who believed he was falling in love with. This boy who, meanwhile, was probably making out with other boys all over the city. I hooked my finger under my guitar string bracelet, running it back and forth on the steel as I spoke. Beck, listen, I said. 12, 11, 10. There's something I need to tell you, I told him. 9, 8, 7. I didn't want to break my best friend's heart, and it wasn't fair Jay had put me in that position. Jay with that ridiculous mohawk. Jay who worked in a coffee shop and probably rode a fixie bike like every other wannabe hipster. Give me a break. But it's not the end of the world or anything, I told him. 6, 5, 4. I was supposed to be the one who protected Beck and made sure nothing got in the way of what he wanted. But I was also supposed to be the one who always told him the truth. It was like an unspoken pact, non-negotiable and binding. Just remember that. Promise me, okay? That you'll remember it's not the end of the world? His eyes narrowed and shifted away from mine. 3, 2, 1. But he interrupted me, saying, "Wait," and I followed his gaze to the barefoot man, who was much closer by then, facing the water, but with his profile in plain view. Black wire-rimmed glasses, his nose the opposite of my mother's, and the one I'd always wished I'd had instead of hers. Of all the men I'd seen those months in the city, this one was the closest, close enough that Beck saw it too. I stood up and called, "Hey," just like I had in every nightmare for the last 69 days. He turned and knocked the wind out of me when I saw it wasn't him. Beck moved his hand to my foot and squeezed. "Sit down, Cal," he said. "It's okay. Just sit down." It struck me then, the impossibility of finding him, like the Alcatraz prisoners who tried to chip through the wall with spoons. That's what I felt like I was doing. The thought hit me square in the jaw. Odds were I was never going to see my father again, not the real him. I might find him in impossible photos or the profiles of strangers, might have visions of him stuck inside century-old scenes. I could spend forever looking. But it hadn't been too long, and he'd left too few clues. No clues at all, really. The truth was, the chances of me finding him were flatlining. I sank to the blanket, gasping for air, scrambling for 12 breaths that I couldn't catch. I didn't end up telling Beckett about Jay. Instead, he put his arm around me until I stopped crying, and we lay on the beach on that dirty brown blanket, counting birds, counting clouds, counting all the different bands we hadn't gotten to see live yet but wanted to. Eventually, I calmed down enough to realize I should probably head home. It felt like days since I'd seen my mom, between band practice and running and her work schedule, and I suddenly wanted to hear her voice in our house. I needed something familiar, something I could trust. Back at home, I pulled out the stack of California earthquake books and struggled to get some reading done, but I was too distracted. I tried the books I'd checked out from the science section too, disaster relief books and ones exploring theories about time warps and black holes, but that didn't work either. And then I was in the closet taking down the shoebox next to the translation dictionaries, the shoebox I kept those homemade cards from my dad in. I dumped the box onto the bed, pushed the books aside, and read and reread his notes, the neat scientific handwriting, printed, never cursive, always lowercase. Happy birthday to my favorite daughter, a recurring joke since I was his only one. To the kid I like most, proud of you on 5th grade graduation day. He had given me a copy of the Children's Encyclopedia of American History that year, a huge hardback I'd spent hours looking through. I like what you've done, my mom said from the hallway, where she slumped against the doorframe. It looks good, that in particular. She nodded to the framed photo of the Chicago Theater. It had hung above my bed. But I'd moved it to the other side of the room when I'd rearranged the furniture and fastened all the bookshelves to the wall near my reading chair. It's better there, gets more light near that window, she said. My mother's hair was pulled into a perfect ponytail, and I could tell she'd been out walking because her cheeks were pink, like sliced strawberries. She did that sometimes, took the bus instead of driving, and got off 5 or 10 blocks before our stop. Head clearing time, she called it, walking off the cobwebs. She eyed the cards on my bed. I always loved his handwriting, she said. Thought he should be a teacher with that kind of print. She picked one up, and I almost stopped her, thinking that they were mine and not something I should have to share. But then I realized maybe she needed them as much as I did. He never was very good at telling jokes, she said. What type of music do mummies listen to? Rap music. Her eyes had those puffy purple half moons around them, and I wish I'd stopped for macarons after I left the beach. We could have shared a box before dinner. You want anything in particular for dinner? She asked, reading my thoughts almost. I feel like cooking tonight, she said, and I told her anything sounded good to me. Something hearty, then, she said decidedly. She poked me in the belly. I worry about you, she said, all skin and bones these days. And then she picked up Organize for Disaster, Prepare Your Family and Your Home for Any Natural or Unnatural Disaster by Judith Kohlberg. I was thinking we should have a plan, I told her as she flipped through the pages. They're called family communication plans, so we'd know how to find each other if we aren't together when something happens, I said. Our school had sent home outlines of those kind of plans after 9/11, but that was years ago. I wanted one for now, one that would make sure I could find her if a quake hit and we were on opposite sides of the city. It had started to rain outside, the drops drumming against the bay window. You shouldn't have to worry so much, she said, and swapped the book for another one of the cards. It shouldn't be like this. You should be out having fun, not reading old notes from your dad. But I told her I liked reading his letters. I know I'm not remembering him right anymore. Like I remember the good stuff only, and part of me hates that, I said. I want to remember that he was terrible at telling jokes, you know? Have you heard about the explosion at the cheese shop in France? Everything is covered in debris. He slurped his soup through his teeth, she said. Do you remember? I did. It was something I hated, like the sound of nails on the chalkboard. He did it on our first date, French onion soup. I remember thinking he seemed like a good guy, but that it would probably never go anywhere. Someone who made so much noise when he ate, she told me. That's how stupid I was. She pinched her lips together, drawing in air for that whoosh noise until I started laughing. I ended up falling in love with that dumb little gap between his two front teeth, and the soup thing turned into a no big deal. It's funny how that happens. She didn't end up making dinner after all. We ordered in instead and took turns reading the cards with the jokes out loud while we waited for delivery. She even used funny voices for some of them, which I never would have expected in a million years. Then we put all the notes back in the box and gorged ourselves on broccoli and corn pizza, both of us eventually falling asleep on the couch in the living room with Splendor in the Grass playing on the TV, a teenage Natalie Wood flickering on the screen.